There are 98 Targaryens in A Song of Ice and Fire history. I counted them, and I think I've got them all right here. So now I'm going to rank them on this bespoke tier list I cooked up in Photoshop, and I'll surely piss all of you off with my opinions. Obviously, I'm talking about the entirety of Targaryen history here, so there's spoilers ahead for every Thrones HBO show. I've also made individual videos for each Targaryen king already, so if you want more details on any of their lore, you can check those out. I'll be moving pretty quickly here, I promise. I've limited myself to named Targaryens only, characters assigned Targaryen at birth. So no Targaryen bastards, like Orys Baratheon, and no Targaryen bastards who later got legitimized, like Bloodraven. Also, there are several stillbirths over the years whose fetuses never got named. If I'm still missing any Targaryens, feel free to yell at me in the comments. Quickly, I'll explain each ranking. Bottom tier is pretty self-explanatory. This is for infant deaths and such. Holy shit, you're insane is for the worst Targaryens to ever live. Targaryens who kinda suck but aren't that bad go in the next tier. Middle tier is for the middest Targaryens. A step above are the above average Targaryens. Then we have Targaryens who are a lot better than you give them credit for. And the top tier is reserved for the greatest Targaryens who ever lived. I'll be going in chronological order, grouping Targaryens by generation. So let's begin with Aegon the Exile, canonically the first named Targaryen. But first, a message from my sponsor, you guys. If you enjoy my channel and you want to support me, you can join my Patreon for $5 per month in exchange for these perks. Early access, updates, your username immortalized on screen right here, etc. Alright, now back to Aegon the Exile. The only thing we know about him is that he packed up his shit and left Valyria after his daughter's dream about the Doom. He also took his slaves, thus saving them from the Doom, and presumably he freed them on Dragonstone and they just became peasants or household servants. Not all that different from being a slave, but at least they avoided perishing in a volcanic inferno. So, for being a practical man who believes women, Aegon is misunderstoodedly awesome. His children were Daenerys the Dreamer and Daemon the Glorious. Daenerys was a dragon dreamer, cool. She wrote her dreams down in a book that was lost to time, even cooler, and she's the reason her family survived. Daenerys, I love you. Her brother husband Daemon has a funny name, but we have no idea what made him so glorious. Daemon, we hardly knew ya. Third generation are their kids, Aegon and Elaena. For being the first canonical Aegon in history, and for ruling Dragonstone jointly with his sister wife, hinting that he was, perhaps, beating the misogynist allegations, Aegon is above average. Elaena is really just a name. A pretty name, but barely a character. Their kids were Maegor and Aerys. Maegor died, or something, maybe he just ran away from home, before having children. He's barely a character. Aerys inherited Dragonstone and was also barely a character. A whole-ass Targaryen history book, and George wasted time on Pate the Woodcock instead of actual Lords of Dragonstone. You know what, I'm okay with that. Aerys had these 3 kids. Aelix has one of the harder Targaryen names in history, but just like his uncle Maegor, he never had heirs. Aelix is okay tier simply for the unique name. His also heirless brother Balon is barely a character. The third brother Daemon was grandfather of the Conquerors, and also, seemingly, the first Targaryen who kept a maester on Dragonstone, hinting that this 5th generation was starting to become more closely tied to Westeros. Daemon is okay. His kid was Aerion, who had a hot Valyrian wife, but who also cheated on her, probably, I suppose they could have had an open marriage, I'll hold space for that, and was the father of the Conquerors and Orys Baratheon. Aerion kinda sucks for probably cheating on Valyria. Visenya, contrary to popular assumption, was the oldest of the conquering trio. She was incredibly badass, wielded Dark Sister, the Kingsguard was her idea, but she also committed atrocities in both Dorne and the Riverlands, and we have Visenya largely to thank for Maegor the Cruel. A complicated woman, Visenya kinda sucks more than she rocks. Her brother husband Aegon was the first Targaryen king, was probably a dragon dreamer who dreamed of the prince that was promised prophecy, cool, and generally had some pretty good policies and laid a solid foundation for the dynasty. But Aegon also committed atrocities in Dorne, and he neglected Maegor in favor of Aenys, which probably made Maegor turn out so weird. Aegon the Conqueror is okay. Rhaenys had the makings of a varsity administrator, might have cheated on Aegon, which isn't cool, and also tragically got sniped out of the air over the Hellholt. For being smart and having a cool death, Rhaenys is above average. The 8th generation Targaryens are just the brothers Aenys and Maegor. Aenys was kind of frail, physically and mentally, and made some really bold decisions without the balls to back them up. Nice, but dumb. The proto-Vizzy the First. Aenys kinda sucked. Maegor had the strength Aenys lacked, and also the insanity Aenys lacked. He had 6 wives, usurped the Iron Throne from his nephew, took a nasty blow to the head which induced a month-long coma and also probably CTE, like a champ, and then basically did whatever he wanted until dying mysteriously. Maegor, quite obviously, goes in the insane tier. Next generation are the 5 children of Aenys. Rhaena the Black Bride is one of my favorite Targaryens George has ever written, and I did this entire video dedicated to her story. She had a cool dragon, cared about her daughter's safety, which I know is a very low bar, but plenty of Targaryens failed to clear it, had a messy relationship with literally everyone she ever met, became Lady of Dragonstone for a while, was definitely a lesbian, bravely escaped Maegor to help Jaehaerys take the throne. I love Rhaena Targaryen. Her brother husband was Aegon the Uncrowned. In my notes here, I just wrote, he tried. And I think that about sums him up. Oh, by the way, I should explain this spreadsheet. I made these notes a long time ago for a different purpose, but I'll reference them from time to time for this video. It helps me remember who everyone is and when they were alive. Viserys was Maegor's squire/hostage, but he got tortured and killed at age 15 after his mom abandoned him. Sad stuff. Hope he's okay. Jaehaerys avenged him by executing everyone involved in Viserys' demise. Jarry was a pretty awesome king with great policies, and it's weird to call him a badass for secretly marrying his little sister in defiance of his mother and future stepfather, but it was kind of badass. However, Jaehaerys was kind of like his uncle Maegor in that he just did whatever he wanted. He didn't want insane things though. He wanted roads, and that was the difference. But he was also a pretty bad dad who made his daughters' lives worse and/or come to an early end. Also, his failure to name Rhaenys as heir, or just codify an actual, concrete succession law, definitely led to the Dance of the Dragons. So Jarry kinda sucks overall. Good king, sucky person. Alysanne was charming and had really good policies. She's like if Rhaenys the Conqueror never got murdered and got to be queen for decades. She also had a hell of a uterus, 13 childbirths, the last one at age 44. For being smart and dealing with a lot of tragedy in her motherhood, Alysanne, I love you. The last child of Aenys was an infant death, and thus barely a character. Jarry and Alysanne had 13 kids, but first we have Rhaena's twin daughters, Aeria and Rhaella. It must be noted that these sisters probably changed places after Jaehaerys' coronation, so the woman who became Aeria was Rhaella at birth, and the woman who became Rhaella was Aeria at birth. Aeria was briefly both Maegor's and Jaehaerys' heir. She had an angsty relationship with her mom, fair enough, and had one of the most gruesome deaths George Martin has ever written. She's misunderstood. Her death by fireworm punishment did not fit her crime, which was simply being a teenager. Rhaella became a septa and comforted her mother Rhaena in her later years. She's above average for sure. Jarry's first 2 kids died as kids. Aegon made it to 3 days before croaking, while Daenerys made it to 7 years before succumbing to the shivers. Dany was briefly heir to the Iron Throne, and was quite possibly a genius, as we're told she could speak well before her first birthday. Aegon's barely a character, but Daenerys is misunderstood. She was a genius, people. Aemon and Balon were the anti-Aenys and Maegor, best friends. Aemon had a cool dragon, became Master of Laws at age 26, and became the victim of a Mirish pirate's horrible archery skills at age 37. He's okay, didn't really do much. Balon avenged Aemon, had a cool nickname, the Spring Prince, became Hand of the King for Jarry at age 43, and died of appendicitis a year later. I'll put him in the above average tier though, because we must give him credit for only being horny for his sister wife Alyssa, and even after being offered sex by his naked little sister Visera, he turned her away. Again, very low bar to clear, but Balon clears it. Alyssa had heterochromia, which is cool. She had a broken nose and wasn't the most physically attractive, but she had moxie. And she was kind of mean to her brother Vaegon a couple of times, but Vaegon also deserved it. For being a badass whose life was cut short by GRRM's laziest hack to kill female characters, Alyssa is above average. Megilla was promised to the faith at the age of 10, so it sucks that her autonomy was removed at such a young age, although she appeared happy as a septa. She was able to reconcile her quarreling parents not once but twice, and she ended up dying of grayscale after helping people sick with grayscale. Underappreciated, for sure. Vaegon was a little bit of an asshole, but not in an insane way. He made fun of his sister Daella's lack of intelligence, was probably asexual because he showed no interest in fornicating his sister, crazy I know, and then he went to the Citadel at age 15 and sorta faded into obscurity. The Great Council of 101 was Vaegon's idea, so we can give him points for being creative, but also dock points for not convincing his dad to just name Rhaenys the heir, or finally codify a succession law, or even just accepting the throne for himself. Overall, Vaegon was just okay. In my notes for Daella, I just wrote, "Fuck you, Jarry," probably because, for really no good reason, Jaehaerys insisted Daella be married off at 16 years old, or else be made to join the Silent Sisters. There was really no pressing need to marry her off so young. Jaehaerys didn't need an alliance, or a grandchild heir, or anything like that. He was just being an asshole. Really, this is just a consequence of Fire and Blood not being all that sensible of a book, but that's a different conversation. Anyways, for dying in childbirth needlessly, Daella's tragedy is misunderstood. Seriously, Jaehaerys deserves way more shit than he gets for this. He effectively killed his daughter. Sarah was a promiscuous teenager who enjoyed boys and making fun of mentally disabled fools. And she escaped Old Town, where she was told to become a septa, and lived the rest of her days in pleasure houses in the free cities. She was a pretty mean person and kind of a handful. Visera was similar to Sarah, although more vain than sadistic, and she was forcibly betrothed to fat, old Theomore Manderly at the age of 15. During a night of drinking and driving, Visera fell off her horse and died. This one was Alysanne's fault for a change, since she didn't want Visera to marry Balon and become queen one day. Visera was okay. Gaiman and Valerion were both infant deaths, and are both barely characters. Gale had a cool nickname, the Winter Child, which reminds me of George's story called The Ice Dragon, where there is another Winter Child named Adara. But Gale's story is super sad. She was potentially developmentally disabled, got seduced by a singer at age 19, and after giving birth to their stillborn child, she drowned herself in Blackwater Bay. That might be all there is to it, which is sad enough, but if Gale was of a diminished mental capacity, my eyebrows are extremely upturned at this singer fellow. He might have coerced this beautiful, simple princess into a sexual relationship, the entire experience thus causing her suicide. Regardless, Gale's tragedy is underappreciated. Now we move into the Dance of the Dragons era. If you don't want House of the Dragon spoilers, this is your stop. See you later. The eldest of the 11th generation was Rhaenys, the queen who never was. The entire civil war, including Rhaenys' own courageous death, could have been avoided if Jarry had just let her be queen. For being a martyr with awesome hair, and for basically running Team Black while Rhaenyra checked out with grief, Rhaenys goes into the second best tier. Viserys isn't insane, but he is going there for his gross ineptitude combined with gross personality. He has so many options to avoid the Dance of the Dragons, and he failed to execute any of them. If you insist on Rhaenyra being your heir, make her Hand of the King, establish her rule in the Red Keep, and make the transition of power seamless. If you insist on having more children, marry Rhaenyra to Aegon to combine their claims. Or just name Aegon your heir to avoid war. Or don't have 3 sons after telling the entire realm your daughter is going to be your heir. and then do fuck all to bolster her claim. He also began fornicating his cousin wife Emma when she was 13, and then refused to get off of her until she died in childbirth. He briefly considered marrying a 12-year-old Laena, and then did marry an 18-year-old Alicent. Viserys was 29. The fact that he was, inexplicably, Balerion the Black Dread's last rider at the age of 16 doesn't do enough to lift him out of the bottom tier. Viserys was the ultimate bag fumbler. He and Daemon also remind me of Aenys and Maegor. Aenys and Viserys were both ineffectual kings who let the realm descend into chaos after their death. Maegor and Daemon were both power-hungry second sons upset with their brother's rule. Daemon was less insane than Maegor, though he did perv on a teenage Rhaenyra and arrange the death of a child. While it's admirable that he fought for Rhaenyra till his death, and went out in one of the more badass ways anyone's ever died, Daemon and Viserys belong together. They can be each other's punishment in purgatory. Rhaenyra was the youngest dragon rider in Targaryen history at age 7, a fact that, while interesting, doesn't pay off in the slightest. I don't blame Rhaenyra for being mostly out of commission while grieving a stillborn daughter and 2 murdered sons, but she did have some pretty bad policies during her time in office. She was dealt a really difficult hand as far as princesses go, and I don't personally care that she had bastards with Harwin Strong. She shouldn't have been married to Laenor in the first place. So I want to put Rhaenyra up in misunderstood, but if I'm being honest, she was just above average. Her brother Balon was nicknamed Heir for a Day, which was Daemon's funniest moment, but he's barely a character. In my notes for Aegon II, I wrote down, it wasn't his fault he was born, and I kind of stand by that. He was the victim of the same awful decision-making Rhaenyra was, and to Aegon's credit, he didn't even want to fight Rhaenyra until Criston Cole convinced him that Rhaenyra would murder him and all his siblings unless he did fight. He's also got a cool dragon, but he cheated on Helaena and fathered bastards, which isn't cool. I respect his bravery fighting on the front lines of his own war, and his final words to Rhaenyra go incredibly hard, but he was a bit too unlikable to be any higher than kinda sucks tier. He enjoyed sexually assaulting women, he threw a party for Lucerys' murder, and I'm glad Corlys poisoned him. Helaena also had a cool dragon, and she did nothing wrong ever. Forced to marry Aegon, forced to watch her son get blood and cheesed, went mad with grief over the death of her second son, and committed suicide in extremely brutal fashion. Helaena is one of Martin's most tragic characters, and I love her. Aemond murdered Luke, which prompted Daemon to do blood and cheese, which prompted Helena's trauma and eventual suicide. For that alone, Aemond is insane, but we also can't forget the atrocities he committed in the Riverlands. Bit of a rascal, that Aemond One-Eye. Daeron has a cool blue dragon, lived in Oldtown since the age of 12, and burned Bitterbridge and a bunch of innocent people along with it to avenge Maelor. He did sort of try to stop the sacking of Tumbleton, so he can just go in the kinda sucks tier. Baela is one of the most badass Targaryens who ever lived. She almost died trying to fight Aegon and Sunfire at Dragonstone, and after she was freed, she stuck a sword in Cregan Stark's face to save the men who freed her. She kissed a kitchen boy and saved his hand from being lopped off. She enjoyed partying, which was well earned after her war efforts, and was overall just an awesome character. S tier, easy. Rhaena spent the war in the Vale, was briefly Aegon III's heir, and helped Baela essentially run the Red Keep while Aegon was busy being sad. Rhaena's above average. Aegon III is what you get when a family tears itself apart to see who gets to sit on a chair, and you're all that's left. He left his brother Viserys for dead on the Gay Abandon, had to see his mom get eaten by a draken before his eyes, and even after reuniting with his brother, he had to suffer the most fucked up regency in history. 6 Hands of the King in just 5 years, all of them sucky in different ways. Aegon was gloomy, married a 6-year-old so he wouldn't have to sleep with her, and despite hating dragons and being accused of killing the last one, he mysteriously attempted hatching dragon eggs later in life. Awesome character. He's misunderstood, but I love him. Viserys was Aegon's rock. He was the hand of the king for 3 different kings before reigning just 1 year himself. He had some good policies and kept the realm afloat for his pea-brained nephews. But also his son was Aegon the Unworthy. Surely we have to put a little blame on the father when a son turns out like that. In Viserys' defense though, he became a father at age 13. What were you doing at 13? I think I was playing Skate 3 and Skyrim all day, and I probably didn't even know what a vagina was. Above average. Jaehaera was 6 when she witnessed blood and cheese, 8 when she forcibly got married to Aegon, and 10 when she committed suicide the same way her mom did. Or when Unwin Peake murdered her so that Aegon could potentially marry his own daughter. Regardless, Jaehaera didn't deserve all that. Love you. Jaehaerys was murdered at 6, and, sad as that is, wasn't much of a character beyond that. Same with Maelor. Witnessed blood and cheese at 2, torn up by a mob at 3. Visenya was a stillborn lizard defect baby, and hardly a character. Aegon the Unworthy spent most of his life as a prince, while his uncle and cousins ruled the realm. Perhaps the worst deed of all was Aegon only having 2 sons. You'd think 2 heirs would be enough to block old Chungus here from the throne, but here we are. Aegon was terribly abusive to both his siblings, worst of all to the one he married. He did some very dumb things as king, like that time he accidentally burned down a quarter of the Kingswood. He essentially purchased a mistress and then sent her back to get killed by her jealous husband after he was done playing with her. And he also fathered Daemon Blackfyre, spent Daemon's whole life propping him up as the favored alternative to his trueborn son Daeron, and then legitimized Daemon and all his other bastards before dying of obesity at age 49. For being awful and causing 5 rebellions, Aegon IV is insane. It's a shame his brother Aemon the Dragon Knight wasn't born first. Made it to the Kingsguard at age 17, served his uncle, 2 cousins, father, and brother, took a poisoned arrow in Dorne for Daeron, and carried Baelor out of a viper's pit, defended Daenerys' honor against some idiot, and was one of the few bright spots in Daenerys' life. His only bad deed was stopping the Toynes from assassinating King Aegon. For not having the balls to pull a Jaime Lannister, Aemon the Dragon Knight was this close to greatness. In my notes for Daenerys, I've just written, "Fuck you, Aegon." That about sums it up. And so does this quote between her and her brother husband. Christ, man. Daenerys, I'll always love you. Now for their younger cousins. Daeron succeeded his father, Aegon III, almost immediately began a conquest of Dorne, and got well over 50,000 people killed before dying and wasting everyone's time. Great warrior, terrible king, the young dragon kinda sucks. Baelor was actually clinically insane. I mean, he was nice and he bravely walked into a viper's nest to rescue Aemon the Dragon Knight, but he's also the only instance where it would have been fantastic if he had sex with one of his sisters. Literally pick one and get her pregnant, man. Baelor's refusal to sire an heir led to Daena having sex with Aegon and creating Daemon Blackfyre, and led to Aegon the Unworthy ultimately ascending the throne. Even though Baelor literally went crazy and fasted himself to death, it just feels wrong placing him lower than Daeron, so they can be right beside each other in their suckiness. Daena was extremely fashionable, wearing black to mimic her depressed father, and then white to mock her prude brother. But she mothered Daemon Blackfyre, and anyone who's dumb enough to procreate with Aegon the Unworthy belongs in the sucky tier. Rhaena was nice and pretty normal, but got super religious and eventually became a septa. Barely a character. Last of the Dragonbane's children, we have Elaena. She had this sick golden streak in her hair, got groomed by a man 30 years older than her, and was essentially the master of coin for Daeron II because her husband was old and bad at math. She had 7 kids and lived until at least age 70, when she was, apparently, a gilf. Above average. The next generation is literally just 2 people, Daeron II and his sister Daenerys. Daeron was betrothed to Maria Martell at 8, but didn't become king until 31. He spent most of his life just enduring his father. As a king, he had good policies, was able to bring Dorne into the 7 kingdoms by giving them Daenerys, and he died at age 55 from the Great Spring Sickness. Solid dude, well above average. Daenerys had a stillborn twin brother. She's a winner, that girl. She married Meryn Martell at 16, but was also in love with Daemon Blackfyre. It's quite possible that Daemon's inability to get into her marriage pants, and having to see her married off to Dorne is the straw that broke the camel's back, as George puts it, to cause his rebellion. For being hot enough to start a war over, and being egalitarian when it came to letting peasants use the water gardens, you people don't appreciate how cool Daenerys was. Baelor Breakspear defeated Daemon Blackfyre in a tourney at age 17, and then beat his ass in a war at age 26. He was Hand of the King for his father Daeron, and, just like his aunt Daenerys, he was non-classist enough to support Dunk in his trial of 7. For being the truest knight among you, Baelor is beloved. His brother Aerys was kind of a nothing burger as a king. He just let Bloodraven rule the realm while he read scrolls and prophecies. He was also probably asexual since he never fornicated Queen Penrose, and he was able to tread water through 3 different rebellions. Curiously, he once sent Bittersteel to the wall instead of executing him. A very strange choice, not exactly a smart one, that I have to assume was prophecy-driven in some way. Did Aerys believe Bittersteel's bloodline would produce the prince that was promised? Aegon, is that you? Is Dany a Blackfyre? For putting my brain in a blender, Aerys is just okay. Rhaegal was kinda cute in an insane way, not really violent, just prancing around naked all the time. He was heir to the throne for 6 years before choking on lamprey pie and dying. Barely a character. Mycor accidentally kinslayed his brother whilst defending his chud son from a Chad hedge knight. He did have a cool wife, Diana Dane, and a cool castle, Summerhall. He also commissioned the first new crown since Aegon the Unworthy. He wasn't a bad king or anything, but for being a prickly son of a bitch who got killed by a rock, Mycor is just okay. I appreciate how he let Egg stay on as Dunk's squire. That was cool of him, and almost cancels out however he fucked up Aerion. Valar had this cool silver streak in his hair, fought acceptably at Ashford Meadow despite not having particularly difficult matchups, was mean to Dunk about Baelor's death, understandable, and was very briefly his grandfather's heir before succumbing to the same illness. It's just a flu, people. For being too scared to take Bloodraven's vaccine, Valar is just okay. His little brother Materis is just a name, really. Don't know nothing about ya, except that he died the exact same way. Daeron the Drunken was a dragon dreamer. Cool. He was nice to Dunk, and did his best to do nothing at the trial of 7, but he probably cheated on his hot Tyroshi pink-haired wife, Kira, because it said that Daeron died of a pox he caught from a sex worker. Still, he's an okay bloke. Aerion quite literally thought he was a dragon. He broke Tanzel's fingers for doing a puppet show he didn't like. He murdered Egg's cat and also abused Egg really creepily. He fought with the Second Sons for a while in Essos, which is just random. And then he fucking died after drinking a jar of wildfire. Insanity, I tell you. Next we have Uncle Maester himself, Maester Aemon. He went to the Citadel at age 9 or 10, and he was nice to Egg. He gave him a mule called Maester, gave us a scientific measurement of Sir Duncan the Tall, 6 feet 11 by the way, and was also really interested in the Prince That Was Promised prophecy. For a while he believed it was Rhaegar, but eventually he came around to believing it was Daenerys. For being a good person who helped mentor Jon, Aemon is beloved. Daella and Rhae are pretty underwritten. We know Daella got married to someone and had some number of children, all of whom probably just died at Summerhall. Barely a character. Rhae tried to spike Egg's drink with a love potion, probably concocted by Shiera Seastar, so we don't love that. But I've got this pet theory about Rhae seducing Dunk and making their bastard the heir of Tarth, resulting in Brienne way down the line. So because of that, Rhae is a-okay. Aegon V was a great king with great policies, influenced by his youth spent appreciating the fact that small folk are people too. He put down the 4th Blackfyre Rebellion, had some difficult children who he was a little bit too lenient with, and thought it was a good idea for Targaryens to have nukes again so that he could force his socialist reforms on the lords of Westeros. For having good intentions paved by blood magic gone terribly wrong in Summerhall, Egg was, well, as a person he was well above average, but he did get so many people, including his own family, killed, I guess I'll split the difference. He was an okay Egg. Aelor and Aelora were Rhaegal's twins who married each other. Aelor was his uncle Aerys' heir for a couple of years, before dying mysteriously in some grotesque mishap caused by Aelora. Just for not being boring, Aelor is above average. Aelora had to deal with the grief of accidentally murdering her brother husband, and then she got attacked at a masked ball by 3 dudes wearing animal face. She committed suicide shortly thereafter. It feels wrong to put her anywhere else except for at her brother's side. Daenora was also Rhaegal's child, the one who married Aerion Brightflame and potentially matched his freak. She had their son, a kid named Maegor, and then both of them fade into complete obscurity. Lots of possibilities, but ultimately Daenora is barely a character. Vaella was Daeron the Drunken's daughter, who was possibly developmentally disabled. She was passed over by Egg for the throne at the Council of 233, and then her life's a mystery. Probably dead at Summerhall though. Barely a character. Maegor I already talked about. He goes in the same tier as his mom. Although the theory that Maegor equals the Tattered Prince has been catching steam. I'll buy a teensy bit of that stock. At least the ages line up, which isn't always a given for Ice and Fire theories. Duncan the Small was Egg's heir until he met Jenny of Oldstones and loved her so much that he abdicated his heirship for her. He also beat up on a 10-year-old Barristan Selmy in a tourney, and then got his ass beat by Barry 6 years later. Anyways, he got Summerhalled along with his father and his namesake. Okay, I guess. Jaehaerys II was a sickly sort of guy who enjoyed incest so much that he married his sister Shera, and then let the ghost of Highheart convince him that the prince that was promised would be born of his children's bloodline. So he made Aerys and Rhaella marry each other too. Kind of a mixed bag here. We love a disabled king. I theorize that Jarry might have had osteoporosis, but similar to my logic with Aegon the Unworthy, you've got to point at least some fingers towards the father when a son turns out as evil as Aerys. So I guess Jarry II can go in the okay tier. His sister wife Shera has a really pretty name, and I find it interesting how she only had 2 children. In a dynasty that loves forcing its women to pump out as many heirs as physically possible, why did Shera stop at 2? Really just 1, since Rhaella had a vagina. Maybe Jarry was just super positive that Aerys would be healthy forever and the bloodline would never be at risk. And there was no sense making more Targaryens when the prince that was promised, aka Daenerys and or Jon Snow, would be born from Aerys and Rhaella's line anyways. So for making me think a little, Shera is above average. Daeron was a solid knight who was betrothed to Olenna Redwine, but was also most likely gay for his friend Jeremy Norridge. He died putting down a rebellion 8 years before he would have just died at Summerhall anyways. But for being an LGBT icon with a martial prowess to match, Daeron is above average. Rhaelle was given to Lionel Baratheon's heir as a consolation prize after Duncan the Small eloped with Jenny of Oldstones. She is also the grandmother of the guy who ended up putting an end to the Targaryen dynasty. I don't think we appreciate how funny that is, so for those reasons, Rhaelle goes up here. And it's no mystery where I'm going to rank the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen. Forced to marry his sister when they didn't even like each other, Aerys chose to make Rhaella's life a living hell. He wasn't insane when he was just a prince, but did have some pretty dumb policies, and it seems his madness got really out of control after his brief stint in Duskendale's dungeon. He was also really weird to Tywin and Joanna. He abused Rhaella for her entire life. He was racist towards Rhaegar's Dornish wife and daughter, a marriage he arranged presumably, even though he did try to find Rhaegar a white Valyrian girl from Essos. And he also wanted to blow up King's Landing before Robert took it from him. In my notes for Rhaella, I just put, "Fuck you, Aerys, and your entire Kingsguard." And that's basically how I feel. Everybody in Rhaella's life let her down. Parents forced her to marry a shithead. That shithead abused her every way a woman can be abused. Her shithead son wasn't man enough to stop the shithead father, and neither were any of the shithead Kingsguard until Jaime finally did something. But even then, Jaime killed Aerys to save his own family, and ostensibly the people of King's Landing. He didn't do anything to help Rhaella. She gave birth to Daenerys during a terrible storm, which is epic vibes, but then, of course, died in childbirth. She and Daenerys both need hugs. Rhaegar was born literally as Summerhall was on fire and his family members were perishing. Kind of hilarious. Even more hilarious, young Rhaegar thought he was the prince that was promised. It's probably not his son Aegon either, despite what he says in Dany's vision. Rhaegar was basically a sane person, but cheated on Elia with a 15-year-old girl, he was 23, because Elia had the gall to be unable to give him any more than the 2 children she already gave him. Rhaegar was also very slow to fix the heiress issue, even though he did sort of try at the tourney of Harrenhal, and he told Jaime he'd fix things, only he got a fat warhammer in the chest before that was possible. For being kind of a loser who just loses, Rhaegar sucks. Shaena was stillborn, but at least she never had to meet her dad. W. Daeron and Aegon were both infant deaths, and both barely characters. Jaehaerys was another stillborn, but his death made Aerys go even crazier, so crazy that he beheaded the wet nurse and literally murdered an entire family. For turning his dad into a serial killer by simply not being alive, Jaehaerys sucks. Come on, bro, just live. It's not that hard. We're all doing it. Viserys III had a super traumatic youth. Grew up with an insane father and abused mother. Mother dies and he's on his own with Willem Darry and a baby sister at age 8, and then finally becomes broken after having to sell their mother's crown. You really want to root for a guy like that, until you see that his trauma morphed into abusing his sister Daenerys, selling her to a foreign warlord, and dying at age 22 in very deserving fashion. Viserys, you would have just sucked, but you're going a tier lower for what you did to Dany. Speaking of Dany, S tier, easy, love her. She had the same traumatic youth Viserys had, except for her it morphed into loving everybody and going on this anti-slavery crusade and pushing back her conquest of Westeros so that she can improve the lives of Essosi slaves. She has dragon dreams, cool, gets impregnated at 14, and the fetus dies because of a witch, so she does a little blood magic and hatches dragons. The type of gal who knows how to turn lemons into lemonade. Dany's a sympathetic character for her aforementioned anti-slavery mission, and also because she really is just lonely, and she wants a home and a family. But it turns out she's super important, and a lot of people are going to start believing she's the princess that was promised. Gee, thanks, Jarry. Anyways, for probably saving the world if George ever finishes the books, Dany is top tier. The final generation of Targaryens are these 3 bozos. Rhaegar's daughter Rhaenys had a cute cat named Balerion, still alive by the way, but Rhaenys was a hostage in the Red Keep to ensure Luwin Martell's and Rhaegar's loyalty, and this culminated in Amory Lorch murdering her. Extremely sad, and I love her. Okay, I realize my hypocrisy in ranking Rhaenys top tier and the Viserys who got hostaged and murdered by Maegor the Cruel in okay tier. They basically have the same story. Viserys, welcome to the top, I guess. Sorry that happened to you. Aegon either got his little baby head smushed against a wall by the mountain, or he's currently invading the Stormlands with the Golden Company. Take your pick. I pick scenario 2 because it's just more interesting. Aegon is overall a pretty decent lad, if a little pompous, and I feel kinda bad for him that he let Tyrion troll him into leaving Essos before teaming up with Daenerys. He's surely going to die, I think to Euron, before Dany's able to save him. But I think his efforts in Westeros will prompt Dany to finally come west, so at least he's got a narrative purpose. For being wrongly accused of not being real, Aegon is a misunderstood king. Last, and certainly least, we have Rhaego, stillborn lizard defect baby, evidently not the stallion who mounts the world, and barely a character. I kinda changed my mind. If you're a Targaryen purist, then the video's over. Thanks for watching. But now I'm gonna rank the Targaryen bastards and close relatives and such that I wasn't planning to, 'cause I'm a sicko like that. Here they are, and we'll go in chronological order. Orys Baratheon was, in all likelihood, the bastard son of Aegon Targaryen, and thus the half-brother of Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys the Conquerors. Orys won the first battle of Aegon's conquest, and then continued kicking ass for the duration of the war. With the help of Rhaenys and Meraxes, he was able to slay the last Storm King, Argilac Durrandon, after giving him the chance to yield. When the garrison of Storm's End brought Argilac's daughter Argella out to surrender, they brought her naked, and Orys was chivalrous enough to give her his cloak. He kept Durrandon's sigil and motto, but invented the name Baratheon. I wonder if it was his mother's name, whoever she was, or if it's some old Valyrian name. Regardless, cool. Not so cool that Argella was forced to marry her father's killer. There is certainly an element of non-consensuality there, but at least she was able to keep living in her familial castle. Anyways, the Dornish eventually chopped off Orys's hand, so Orys resigned as Aegon's first ever Hand of the King since he felt useless one-handed, and devoted the rest of his life to getting revenge on the Dornish. He died happy of wounds he suffered getting that revenge against House Will. Above average. Aemma Arryn was Daella Targaryen's daughter, after King Jarry forced Daella to marry old Roderick Arryn at age 17. Daella died tragically in childbirth, and so did Aemma 23 years later. For having to have sex with Viserys at age 13 and getting to be Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, Aemma Arryn, I love you. By the way, Jaehaerys was still king when Aemma married Viserys. He did the exact same thing to his granddaughter that he did to his daughter. The only reason I'm keeping Jarry in the kinda sucks tier is that his horribleness only impacted individual people close to him, so I can't put him on the same tier as Viserys, whose idiocracy caused a continent-spanning civil war. I mean, Jarry did play a role in causing the dance too, but at least the realm was still salvageable for Viserys, who just completely fumbled it. Next we have the children of Rhaenys Targaryen and Corlys Velaryon. Laena claimed Vhagar, the oldest and baddest dragon alive, before she turned 12. For swerving King Viserys' marriage bed, having badass twin daughters with Daemon, and having a potentially sapphic relationship with Rhaenyra before dying in the most boring way George knows, Laena is beloved. Laenor was misguidedly passed over for the Iron Throne in favor of Viserys when he was 7 years old, and apparently had an open marriage with Rhaenyra since he was another gay icon, and probably got murdered by his lover, Karl Corey. Like Prince Daeron, Laenor is above average. Nettles is almost certainly the bastard daughter of Daemon Targaryen, based on this quote and the fact that her name is a reference to Robin Hobb's Nettle Farseer, who is the bastard daughter of Fitzchivalry. For picking herself up by the bootstraps, taming a dragon with sheep, and disappearing somewhere into the Vale after the war, Nettles is actually misunderstood. Too many people think she was Daemon's lover. She's so clearly his daughter. Now I'll rank the strong boys, Jace, Luke, and Joff. Jacaerys did have the makings of a varsity king, being able to sway the Aarons, the Sistermen, the Manderleys, and the Starks to join Rhaenyra's cause. He even did the Pact of Ice and Fire with Cregan Stark, which is cool. Might have cheated on Baela with Sarah Snow, which is less cool but interesting at least. And at the very young age of 14, he had the good sense to name Corlys Velaryon the Hand of the Queen and put out the call for dragon seeds and protect his brother Joffrey by sending him to the Vale, and arranged a ship to take Aegon and Viserys away to safety before dying in the Battle of the Gullet. Overall, Jacaerys Velaryon deserves love. Lucerys, at the age of 5, slashed out Aemon's eye for shoving Joffrey and claiming Vhagar. Aemon's comeuppance was to eat Lucerys and his dragon whole, 9 years later. For being small and thus easy pickings, Luke is okay. But if I'm being honest, Lucerys' cloak was a parachute. He survived the fight against Vhagar, smacked his head on a rock, and suffered a cocktail of amnesia and CTE. For living the rest of his days as a simple fisherman, Luke is above average. Joffrey didn't read his history lessons. At the age of 13, during the storming of the Dragon Pit, he tried mounting a dragon that didn't belong to him, and was subsequently thwacked to his death. For being brave and very stupid, Joffrey was just okay. Trystane Truefire was 15 when the Hedge Knight he served as squire, Sir Perkin the Flea, took advantage of the chaos on King's Landing after Rhaenyra's departure and installed Trystane on the Iron Throne, on the basis that he was Viserys I's bastard son. I find this extremely hard to believe. Viserys didn't have time for sex workers or paramours in between all the child wives he was fucking. But Trystane had some great policies, and I feel bad that Sir Perkin was an ingrate who sold him out to Boris Baratheon. For dying as a true knight, Trystane Truefire was above average. Aemon Palehair is, supposedly, Aegon II's bastard. In the same month-long period as Trystane, Aemon's sex worker mother and all her sex worker friends propped him up as the rightful king. He was 4, but had some fantastic policies. Anyways, Aegon II spared him on account of his age and let him become a ward. or perhaps Aegon didn't want to behead his own son. And Gaiman became Aegon III's best friend during the early stages of his reign, and was unfortunately his whipping boy until dying of poison as a consequence of his second job, being Aegon's food taster. For being forced into child labor and never complaining about it, Gaiman is beloved. The next Targaryen bastards were the 4 daughters born to Merry Meg after Aegon the Unworthy bought her from her blacksmith husband. The girls were all condemned to become septas, and I do feel bad for their agency being stripped away at a young age, but they were barely characters. Then there were the 3 bastards between Aegon IV and Belager Otherys. Bellanora became a famous courtesan in Braavos, described as the most beautiful woman in the world. To me, she's above average. Nara reminds me of the Nara trilogy of songs by Alt J, which are essentially about gay rights and also about how folks in the Japanese city Nara love deer. And I love Alt J, so I love Nara Otherys. Balerion thinks he's real tough with that name, but he's nothing, a nobody.
You suck! You are no talent!
Here's the most famous Targaryen bastard, Daemon Blackfyre, the product of Prince Aegon the Unworthy and Princess Dana the Defiant's union. Similar to Aegon II, it's not Daemon's fault he was born, and it's not his fault he was so good at being a knight that Aegon the Unworthy publicly acknowledged him as his son and gave him the ancestral sword of Targaryen kings, Blackfyre. Daemon was 14 when Aegon IV died and legitimized him, but he didn't rebel against Daeron II for another 14 years. For being thrust into an anti-Dornish conspiracy and peer-pressured into starting a war, and for not being able to marry his great love, Daenerys, ultimately Daemon Blackfyre did choose to fight, and thus I can place him no higher than okay. He had a hot wife and a big family, and Daeron II even gave him land and the right to build a castle. He could have had a happy life, but he fumbled. Aegor Rivers, or Bittersteel, was bitter about being a Bracken who had to live with the Brackens instead of at the Red Keep. He was bitter about Shiera Seastar preferring Bloodraven, bitter about Bloodraven's mom, Melissa Blackwood, being more respected than his mom, and also how a bunch of his Bracken family were executed for what his aunt did. For being a bitter weirdo for peer pressuring Daemon Blackfyre to rebel, and then not knowing when to quit, Bittersteel is freaking insane, dude. Maya and Gwenys came before Bloodraven, but we know nothing about them. Barely characters. I'm guessing they just lived at court with Bloodraven, or at court in Raventree Hall, until they married some nobleman. Bloodraven is the only person in this video besides Dany and Aegon, and Jon, who I'll get to in a sec, who is still alive. He is 125 years old, and essentially a tree. Before that, he was good enough at archery to slay Daemon Blackfyre and his 2 sons at the Redgrass Field. He put a stop to the 2nd and 3rd Blackfyre rebellions during his 24-year tenure as Hand of the King, but then got fired by Egg for killing another Blackfyre he had promised not to. He became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch before presumably meeting the Children of the Forest and disappearing forever into that cave, devoting the rest of his life to using his green-seeing magic to prepare Westeros for the Long Night. He chose Bran Stark to be his apprentice and is currently giving him his tutelage, and might have tried other apprentices in the past, like Euron Greyjoy. For being one of the most interesting characters George Martin has ever written, despite potentially arranging the deaths of several family members to ensure Egg could inherit the throne for the sake of prophecy, I simply have to put Bloodraven top tier. I'm extremely eager to see him in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. I hope they bring in the same actor from that awful Weirwood vision in Hot D Season 2 finale, and just retcon his appearance to be book accurate, because aside from the lack of red eyes and eye patch, he looks great here. Anywho, now we have Bryndon's potentially lifelong situationship Shiera Seastar, the Star of the Sea, the most beautiful woman perhaps ever in Westeros. I'd submit Val the Wildling Princess, but that's neither here nor there. You can tell George wrote her description one-handed. She was definitely a sorceress who bathed in blood to retain her beauty, and she enjoyed making Bloodraven jealous by refusing to marry him and sleeping with other men. For being the woman he desired, and if the Quaithe allegations are true, the woman he still desires, Shiera Seastar is top tier. Jon and Jane Waters were the twin bastards of Elaena Targaryen and Alan Velaryon. We don't know anything about Jane, so she's barely a character. But John Waters had a son who became the famous knight Longwaters, and began the House of Longwaters, which is still alive in Yennefer Longwaters, who works in the Red Keep's dungeon. For sharing a name with the legendary director of Pink Flamingos, John Waters is okay. The actual last Targaryen bastard is Jon Snow. No, it hasn't been confirmed in the books yet, but George and his associates have made it extremely clear. Rhaegar plus Lyanna equals Aemon Targaryen. I mean, Jon Snow. Had a relatively cushy upbringing as the bastard of Winterfell, joins the Night's Watch for something to do, and gets coerced into a sexual relationship with a hot redhead and realizes that the free folk aren't that weird for not wanting to be turned into zombies. Becomes Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, honorably denies Stan Baratheon's offer to become Lord of Winterfell, and his bad communication skills result in being assassinated for letting the wildlings through the wall and planning to ride south and save his sister Arya, who's actually Jane Poole, from the clutches of Ramsay. Overall, Jon's a hero, and I love him, and he goes right next to Dany, his future wife probably. I think my most normie opinion is that I love Jon and Daenerys more than anyone else in the series, and they're the main characters, so it's not exactly a hot take. Well, they're my favorite besides Justin Massey, of course. Anyways, now that's everyone. Let me know down in the comments which rankings you totally disagree with, and how stupid you think I am. Also, be sure to check out my new second channel, where I'm uploading gaming stuff like GeoGuessr, exclusives from my Patreon, and some other stuff that doesn't really fit here on my main channel. Alright, thanks for watching, goodbye.